I still got there. Not fast. Not smooth. Not anything close to what you'd call a straight shot. But I got there. From a small town in Pennsylvania to a corner office near Wall Street. If you'd told me 10 years ago that I'd be pulling in 7 figures doing investment deals, I would have laughed. Hell, I would have thought you had me mixed up with someone else. My name's Preston. I grew up in a town you probably wouldn't know unless your car broke down on the way to Pittsburgh. Small town, same faces, same problems. My dad was a welder, Mom worked at the pharmacy. We weren't poor, but we weren't ever ahead either. I started swinging a hammer with my uncle when I was 16 and stuck with carpentry through high school. I liked building things. Something about turning raw wood into something useful, it made sense. But I had this itch. This feeling like there had to be more. I'd sit on the porch after dinner watching headlights from the freeway and wondering where all those cars were going. I wanted to do something bigger. Something that mattered. I didn't know what that looked like, but I knew I didn't want to be 50 and still counting boards at Lowe's. I was 24 when it started to change. I'd picked up a gig making custom furniture for folks with cabins up in the mountains. One day I got a call from a guy named Mike. Said he wanted a table for his family. Big one. Mahogany, polished, hand-carved edges. Didn't flinch when I told him the price. The weird part? He gave me an address back in my own town. Not one of the cabins, just a big white house on the edge of town that used to sit empty for years. I drove the table over in my pickup. Thing weighed a ton. When I pulled up, I remember seeing this clean black Mercedes in the driveway. Brand new. Not something you'd ever expect to see parked next to the old diner. Mike came out to greet me, shook my hand firm, and helped me carry the table inside. Guy was in his early 40s, sharp dresser, cool as hell. We got the table into the dining room. Place looked like it was ripped out of a catalog. Big windows, art on the walls, espresso machine in the kitchen. That's when he asked if I wanted a coffee. I figured why not. We sat in the living room with these tiny mugs of espresso that made me feel like a giant. I asked him, kinda half-joking, so where's a guy like you get the kind of money for a car like that and dropping cash on a table like this just for dinner? He didn't laugh. He just smiled, sipped his coffee, and said, that's the problem with young guys. You think too small. You think too literally. You see a car and a table. I see value. I see assets that represent something. That hit me. Not sure why, but it did. He walked over to the table, ran his hand along the edge, and said, this is good work, Preston. Real good. You ever thought about working outside of carpentry? I told him I didn't go to college. That I barely passed algebra. He shrugged. Doesn't matter. What matters is how you think and what you're willing to build. Then he said the words that kicked everything into gear. I've got a design firm in the city. We do custom builds for high-end spaces, offices, boardrooms, the kind of places where money moves fast. I need a guy like you to make things the right way. I'll pay you better than any mountain cabin will. That night, I couldn't sleep. It felt like the whole world just cracked open in front of me. A week later, I was on a train to New York. First time I'd ever been to the city. Mike set me up with a temp place to stay, a studio in Brooklyn, not fancy, but clean. He covered the rent. Told me to show up at this address in Midtown on Monday at 8 a.m. I got there early. The building was glass and steel, tall enough to block the sun. Inside, everything was polished, marble floors, soft music, people in sharp suits. I felt like I'd wandered onto a movie set. A receptionist showed me upstairs. Mike's office was minimalist but impressive, big windows, clean desk, framed blueprints on the walls. He handed me a file. First job, he said. Boardroom table. Walnut. Needs to seat 20. Built-in power outlets. Sleek, modern, but it's gotta feel substantial. This is for a hedge fund manager who spends more time at the table than at home. I spent the next 3 weeks building that beast in a rented workshop space in Queens. I took every lesson I'd ever learned in that little garage back home and doubled down. When we delivered it, the client ran his fingers along the edge and nodded. This is it, he said. That one job led to another. And another. Each time, Mike introduced me not as a carpenter but as a designer. He gave me credit, lifted me up in rooms I didn't belong in. I kept learning. I kept building. By the end of that year, I had a small team. Just 3 guys, but we were booked months out. Mike called it a boutique firm. I called it the shot I never thought I'd get. One night, after a delivery, Mike and I grabbed a drink. I asked him why he picked me. He sipped his bourbon and said, "You didn't just build furniture. You cared about it. That's rare. And I knew if I could show you the right rooms, you'd figure out how to stay in them." He wasn't wrong. It took about a year before I really started understanding the kinds of people Mike worked with. These weren't just guys looking for expensive furniture. They were decision makers. Hedge fund founders, tech startup CEOs, finance people with watches that cost more than my old truck. They weren't buying tables. They were buying symbols, influence, identity. One of the turning points was when we built a conference table for a private equity firm in Tribeca. The job was brutal, tight deadline, stupid high expectations, and they wanted this crazy inlay of brass and walnut that made no sense at first. But I figured it out, took some risks, came out beautiful. When we delivered it, one of the partners came out, looked at the table, then looked at me and said, "You do this yourself?" I nodded. He stuck out his hand and said, "You ever think about investing?" I thought he was joking. Turns out he was serious. He invited me to a pitch night they hosted once a quarter, kind of a vetting session for startup founders. That night I went. I didn't understand half of what was said. But I listened. I watched how these guys thought. I saw how they sized up risk. It reminded me of building, honestly, taking raw material and shaping it into something useful. I told Mike about it. He said, "That's the next level. You want to build for others or learn to build for yourself?" That question haunted me for weeks. I kept taking jobs, building high-end work, but in the back of my head, I started seeing every client differently. I asked more questions, not just about their tables, but their businesses, their work, their vision. A few of them started talking to me like I was more than a furniture guy. Mike noticed. One afternoon he brought me a folder. Said, "Look this over." Inside was a breakdown of a small real estate startup. 2 young founders looking for seed money. Mike said he was passing but thought I might be interested. I spent that weekend reading it front to back, researching everything. I ended up meeting the founders on a Monday at a cafe. I didn't have much to offer, but I put in $10,000, pretty much all I had at the time, and helped them build out their office space for free. That company sold 2 years later for 30 times what they were worth when I met them. That was it. The first real taste. After that, I started doing more. Angel investing, early-stage startups, real estate flips. Mike backed a few of my deals quietly, helped me structure partnerships, connected me to the right legal and tax people. I was still building furniture, but now I was also building wealth. I opened my own LLC, hired a financial advisor, started saying no to the wrong jobs. By my 4th year in the city, I wasn't just in the room anymore. I was part of the table, part of the talk. I still remember walking into a firm on Madison Avenue, wearing a blazer that actually fit, pitching a design plus equity proposal. They accepted. That deal paid more than the last 10 jobs I'd done combined. And Mike? He never gloated. Just gave me this nod like, "Told you so." Funny thing, turns out wood was never the final product. It was just the opening line. By year 5, I was juggling 2 worlds, the hands-on builder and the behind-the-scenes investor. Most days started in the shop and ended in boardrooms. I was making more money than I ever dreamed back in Pennsylvania. But with it came pressure I hadn't prepared for. I started stretching myself thin. We were taking on more design contracts than we could handle, and I was fielding calls about startups that needed quick cash, or real estate partners trying to fast-track a closing. Everyone needed something, and I was the guy who'd figure it out. That was the problem, I always figured it out. Until I couldn't. One deal in particular nearly wiped me out. A logistics startup. Slick founders, big promises, all the right buzzwords. They'd landed a couple high-profile clients and made it sound like they were scaling overnight. I didn't do the homework like I usually did. I was tired, distracted. I liked the guys and trusted a gut feeling. I put in $250,000. 6 months later, the company folded. Turns out they had no real systems in place, just clever branding and a lot of bluffing. I didn't just lose the money. I lost face with 2 partners who'd come in on the deal because I vouched for it. Mike called me one night after it all came down. He didn't yell, didn't say, "I told you so," just said, "You forgot what got you here, Preston. You stopped asking the hard questions." That one stung, because he was right. For a few weeks I shut down, canceled meetings, told the crew at the shop to run without me. I holed up in that same little Brooklyn apartment I hadn't moved out of yet despite all the money I hadn't let go of it. I just needed to think. I went back to basics. Dug out the first table designs I ever drew for Mike. Ran my hands over some scrap walnut I kept from a project. Remembered what it felt like to make something from nothing. And I realized I'd gotten too far from that. That's when I made a change. Not a full stop, but a recalibration. I slowed down the investing. I started vetting everything with a fine-toothed comb. I brought in a partner who had a finance background and trusted him to do the numbers I'd been winging. I cut back to 3 big design jobs a year and made each one count. No more quantity over quality. I met with Mike again over coffee, not espresso this time, just plain diner stuff. I thanked him. He said, "You hit the wall? That's where most people quit. But you didn't. That's the difference." Looking back, I think that loss might have been the best thing to happen to me. It forced me to define what success really meant. Was it just money? Titles? Having people know your name? Or was it building something real, something lasting, not just for others, but for yourself? I chose the latter. And for the first time since I left Pennsylvania, I felt grounded again. After all the late nights, boardroom wins, and gut punch losses, there was one job that stopped me cold. It wasn't for a hedge fund. It wasn't for some VC-backed startup in a glass tower. It was for my parents. They still lived in the same house I grew up in, modest, clean, tucked behind the corner gas station in our little Pennsylvania town. My mom had been hinting for years that she wanted a real dining table, not the wobbly one with a cracked leg that had followed us from house to house. So I finally said, "All right, Mom. I'll build you one." I took 2 weeks off everything. Cleared the calendar. No calls. No meetings. Just me, some aged cherrywood I'd been saving, and my shop back in Brooklyn. I went at it like it was the first table I ever made, like it had to be perfect. Every curve, every joint. I even hand-carved their initials underneath the surface where no one else would see. Then I drove it back home myself. 13 hours through the mountains, just me and the table wrapped in moving blankets. When I got there, Dad helped me carry it in. He still had that quiet pride in his eyes, even if he didn't say much. Mom teared up when she saw it. Ran her hands along the top like she was reading it in Braille. That night, we had dinner on it, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans. Nothing fancy, just the kind of meal that makes you remember where you came from. My little niece spilled juice on it. Mom freaked. I laughed. That night I sat out on the porch with Dad. Same old creaky chairs, same view of the highway where I used to sit and dream about leaving. He looked at me and said, "You did good, son." That stuck. A couple weeks later I got a call from Mike. He was putting together a small investment fund, something different. Not for the big boys. For first-timers. Tradespeople, small-town folks, people like me 10 years ago. He wanted me to help run it. Said I knew how to spot real value, and more importantly, I knew how to talk to people who never thought they'd be part of something like that. We called it the Family Table Fund. We kept it small, tight, personal. Every investor had to sit down with us, no faceless wires or digital forms. We built trust first. Over coffee. Over shared stories. Some of those investors, they'd never owned stock before. Never imagined they could. And we built our office around a custom cherrywood table, just like the one in my parents' house. Full circle. I wasn't just making tables anymore. I was giving other folks a seat at one. Wall Street wasn't part of the plan, not at the beginning. I thought it was a world made up of people who came from somewhere else, went to Ivy League schools, wore watches they couldn't pronounce. But somewhere along the way, while I was busy building tables and trusting my gut, I found myself drifting closer to that world. The Family Table Fund grew slow and solid. We didn't chase trends. We backed local projects, family-run startups, things we could touch and understand. And people started noticing. Mike had always had one foot in finance, but now we were being invited to speak at small conferences, meet with community banks, even talk shop with folks at some of the big-name firms downtown. One day, we got an email from a guy who ran a boutique wealth management firm in the financial district. He'd heard about the fund from a client of ours. He asked if I'd come speak to a small group of investors. "Just talk about your journey," he wrote. "They need to hear from someone real." I didn't even own a proper suit at the time. Had to borrow one from Mike. But I went. That morning, walking into a conference room on the 28th floor with the view of the East River, I felt like an imposter. These were the people I used to think would laugh me out of the room. But they didn't. They listened. They asked questions. And when I told them I started by carving tables in my uncle's garage, a few of them smiled like they missed those kinds of stories. After that, things moved fast. We picked up a handful of high-net-worth clients, folks who wanted a piece of what we were doing but didn't want the usual flash and jargon. They liked that we were plain-spoken. That we built trust the same way you build a table with strong joints and no shortcuts. I spent more time downtown. Started learning the ropes. Not just the language of investing, but the rhythm. The way deals were built, the way risk was weighed. It was different from the shop, but in some ways, the same. Still about balance. Still about knowing where to cut and where to reinforce. By year 7, I had my own office in a shared space off Broad Street. Nothing flashy, just a desk, a view, and a table I built myself. That felt right. People started calling me an investor. An advisor. I never stopped thinking of myself as a builder. But now, instead of wood, I was shaping futures. That part to getting used to. The biggest surprise? I actually liked it. Not for the money, though it was good, but for what it allowed me to do. I could go back to towns like mine and offer real capital. Real belief. Not just sympathy, but a seat at the table. It meant something. And Mike, he stayed close. He still had his own ventures, but he showed up to every quarterly meeting we held, sat at that cherrywood table, and reminded me where I came from if I ever got too ahead of myself. Wall Street wasn't a destination for me. It was just another job site. Another challenge. Another thing to shape. And I was ready for it. The longer I stayed in the game, the more I realized anyone can make money. But not everyone can build something that outlives them. I started focusing on legacy, not in some big, ego-driven way, but in the sense of roots. Stability. What kind of table am I leaving behind for the people who'll sit at it next? The family table fund turned into more than just a capital venture. It became a mentorship circle. We brought in new tradespeople, ex-military guys, even folks from halfway houses, people who didn't think finance was for them. I taught them what Mike taught me: think bigger. Ask questions. Take ownership. One of the guys, Leo, had been a mechanic for 20 years. Never owned a suit, never thought he'd be more than a wrench. But after a year with us, he launched a mobile auto repair startup. Got funding. Grew it. Now he hires ex-cons and gives them a path. That's legacy. We started running annual retreats, not in some swanky resort, but in a converted barn upstate. With stoves, homemade meals, real talk. We sat around fires, not PowerPoint slides. Shared our worst decisions, our best wins, and the things that scared us. It brought us closer. Made it real. Mike started slowing down a bit. Spent more time with his wife, did more hiking, less talking. One day he handed me a folder just like he did years ago and said, "You run it now. I'll stay close, but this thing's yours." I didn't cry. Not then. But later, sitting alone in my shop, I felt it. The full weight of everything we'd built. And that shop, it's still running. I still go there on Fridays. Still build one table a year with my own hands. I don't sell them. I give them away. To a new couple. A retiring firefighter. A teacher who changed someone's life. Because that's what Mike did for me. He gave me a table and then he gave me a seat at one. I visit my parents every couple months. We still eat at that same cherrywood table. My niece is older now. She sets the plates without being asked. And sometimes, when no one's watching, I run my hand along the underside, feel those initials carved there, and remember. I still got there. And maybe more importantly, I helped others get there too.